All right, Kraig Adams, thank you, man. This is a weird, interesting honor for me. One of the beautiful things about having a podcast is that I can reach out to people that I come across out in the media ecosphere, and sometimes they will make some time to stop in and say hello. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you. Yeah, I keep my schedule free just for happy little coincidences like this. And, thank you for having me.
Well, you're a traveler, and one of the first things that I think we learn as travelers is that to overschedule is to deny yourself most of the real juice that comes from traveling, right? It comes out of left field. We don't know when or how it's coming.
Yeah, I just try to keep it as free as possible. It's gradually become more and more, no schedule kind of lifestyle.
Yeah. You're back in New York?
Yeah, I'm in the Lower East Side right now. Currently looking at apartments all across Manhattan. Now is a good time to snag some low prices for rentals, but I've lived in the state of New York all my life. I've traveled all over, but I love New York City.
I lived in the Lower East Side in 89, 88, 89. What was the name of the street? It was just a block south of Houston, about with Avenue A. I don't remember the name of the street, but I remember I was on the ground floor apartment. It was built right over the boiler for the whole building. And this pipe, this like 6-inch pipe came up right in the middle of my apartment. So you had to be careful never to touch the pipe or you'd burn, you'd scalding heat. It's an interesting time. Yeah, banging, hissing, It was like trying to sleep on a bomb or something that was, threatening to go off at any point. The whole city was like a bomb in those days, This was early AIDS, pre-Giuliani, lots of real craziness going on.
80s. Every time I tell people who are older than me that I live in the Lower East Side of New York, they always have this similar response. They're like, are you okay? I'm like, it's different. Exactly. As far as I know, it's different.
It's different. It's like Colombia. I always wanted to go to Colombia, but when I was doing a lot of traveling 20, 25 years ago, like, you didn't go to Colombia. Forget about it. You'd be kidnapped before you got out of the airport. And now Colombia is a cool place to go, apparently. Have you done any trips down there?
Yeah, I was in Colombia a month ago for the first time, but I've dabbled all across South America. And I hear stories. I don't know. I guess I'm just young and naive, and I've never had a bad situation. So it's a really weird balance of kind of hearing these things, but then disregarding them as people who may not have experience there, or they just were in the wrong places at the wrong time. But I've always had pleasant experiences in Peru and Nepal and Hong Kong and Guatemala, just everywhere.
Yeah. How old are you?
I'm 30.
30. Okay. So you don't know much about me, I assume, but I backpacked around the world through my 20s and 30s. I hitchhiked from college in upstate New York to Alaska, got a job in a salmon cannery for the summer, went back, finished college, hitchhiked back again with a buddy. And then I was just like totally hooked on travel, and I trashed my plans to go to grad school. I had everything all lined up to go to Oxford and become a professor and all this stuff. And I was just like, nah, fuck it. I'm going to travel around the world. I sat down, I said, okay, until I turn 30, I'm just going to float around the world and see what happens. I won't make any decisions. No marriage, no career, no grad school, no med school, nothing bonding until I'm 30. And then I'll know better what I want to do with my life. And so my life has taken a very different path than it would have if I had stuck to the original plan.
So throughout all those travels, was it always just consuming experiences and connecting with people and then putting yourself in risky situations, just learning and growing? Or was there any amount of capturing and documenting and sharing footage? Like, were there blogs? Were there, I don't even know. I can't even imagine traveling without sharing it with an audience.
Yeah, well, this is one of the things I wanted to get into with you. I was listening to this stream that you did a while in March, I think, and you talked about how you saw your life or your work as taking experience from the darkness and bringing it into the light, I think was the phrase that you used. And I don't think you were referring to any sort of evil, good continuum there. It just seemed like private, bringing it into the public realm. And you were talking also about, sort of like your experience is the product that you're selling in a way. And your experience is, of course, unique because it's you. It's the way you choose to plan your trips and film your trips and what equipment you use and decisions you make in terms of sound and music and whether there's dialogue or not. Really interesting. And I did deal with that issue to some extent. But okay, so I graduated high school in 1984. I turned 30 in 92. So this is pre-internet. When I was your age, the internet was like something happening in Silicon Valley, basically. Okay. And I happened to live in New York at the time, and I was in grad school. And I remember I got a computer, a compact computer it was called, and you could like log in to this network. The school had a network. And I remember thinking, man, this is going to take off. This is crazy because I'd been traveling for 10 years. So my whole thing was like, I want to go to grad school, but I don't want to be living here. I want to be in Spain. I had a Spanish girlfriend at the time. And so as soon as I could, I was like, fuck it, I'm going to Spain. I'll do this remotely. I figured, I was one of the first in the first wave of people to figure out how to live independent of location. And anyway, but back to the traveling, it was an issue. My thing was writing. So I wrote in my journal a lot and I traveled alone almost exclusively. So I spent a lot of time sitting in cafes and guest houses alone. And, but it wasn't really, I was writing, I think, because I was lonely. And I was writing to a future self. And sometimes when I watch your videos, I feel like I am that future self that I was writing to, because I just turned 59. And I project myself into your experience, and I think about 30 years from now, you're going to look back at these videos, and it's like these videos are a celebration of youth in a way. I mean, I don't know. I'm projecting a lot here, but I feel like I see things when I watch your videos that you don't even know are there. And 30 years from now, you're going to look back and be like, damn, that's who I was.
Yeah, I can understand that. And even just looking at vlogs that I made 5 or 4 years ago, I kind of am getting a glimpse of probably what you're feeling. And I feel some motivation to like make a new video, just using that footage and reflecting on what it looks like 5 years out. And I feel like the more I do that, and I think it would be cool to take an entire decade's worth of experiences documented in front of an audience and like just talk about what was really important and what I thought was important. And yeah, the retrospective thing is something that I'm starting to feel more and more. So I can understand that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I have some journals that I kept from those days. And sometimes I look at them, not nearly as much as I thought I would look at them when I was writing them.
Yeah.
But sometimes I'll open one up and, I've copied out a quote from a book, that I was reading at the time. And I still remember that quote. I still remember that book. Or I'm writing about, a kind of perspective on life. And 30 years later, it's like, that's still my perspective. I still think about that. I still quote that line from Henry David Thoreau. I still refer to this, the autobiography of Carl Jung. Like, it's like, I guess I didn't realize that I was laying bricks, that I'm still living in the same house. I can still see those bricks. They're at the bottom of the wall, right? The wall's gone up quite a bit since there, but that's still the bottom of the wall I live in. It's still there. Age is like a cumulative thing, right? It's not change, it's addition, I think, is what I'm trying to say.
And before, it'd probably be more in our thoughts and the stories we tell with the people, we can connect with over a campfire, or coffee or beer, or whatever. But more and more, it's like literal documentation. In your terms, journal with words. And for me, it's video. And I would say there's more data packed into video than journal. And it's always interesting when I hear people who have like books and books of I think even Tim Ferriss talks about how he has an entire library just with notebooks and he can go back and find it. But I just feel like that's so much work to archive and catalog all of that information. I would rather do the hard work of putting it into, this trip in one photo, this trip in one 1 minute video, or this entire year summed up into 3 minutes. I feel like that's so much more easy and useful to consume after the fact, but it's all kind of the same thing. It's all just the raw data stream of our experience, just distilled and edited and, in dense formats in different ways. Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing that I think about a lot when I watch your material is that you are a creature of this world, of this moment in history, much more than I am. I feel like I live in your world. And I see your comfort, for example, with social media, your comfort with various forms of technology that are relatively new. And you just, even your comfort, and I don't know, again, I know I'm projecting onto you because I don't know you personally at all. So please pardon me for doing that.
We're getting to know each other. It's all good.
But like, even the way you interact with other people, like I was watching the Kilimanjaro video.
That's a weird one.
Yeah, that was interesting. And I'm really glad that you chose to frame that the way you did. Very sort of like, hey, this is... I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, I think a lot of the reason I really enjoy your stuff is that it's both very clearly crafted, but there's something extremely vulnerable and sincere. And that's really hard to do. When you're sitting in a cafe by yourself writing in a journal, it's easy to be sincere. Nobody's seeing it except you. You're writing to some imaginary figure that you imagine 30 years from now is going to look back and read this. Maybe no one will ever read it. You're alone. You're in the darkness. It's easy to be naked in the darkness. But you manage to be pretty naked with the awareness that you've got an audience of, some of your videos are over 1 million views, I think. And yet you maintain a very kind of Zen-like sincerity and vulnerability in that. Is that something you struggled to achieve, or is that just your nature as a person?
Yeah, I think I started almost 100% doing all of my work and creating what I did for other people. And gradually over time, I've gained more confidence in doing it for my own sake. And I also love that you brought up creating work for your future self, because I think that's an even better definition of art. When people say they do it for its own sake, it's kind of a selfish reason. Like, I create this almost like for my future self to look at, or if people give advice, it's almost like what they wish they had years ago. I think that's a better lens explaining why we make, authentic art that's not really to make money or to get views for other people. I think that's a good definition. I think I'm going to start using that more and more.
Well,
Yeah.
I remember reading a quote somewhere that you should always write posthumously. In other words, you should write as if you're already dead. I've published 2 books, and one of them was a worldwide global bestseller. A lot of people have read it, or at least bought it. I don't know if they've read it. I don't care. Just buy it. but the odds are good that more people will read that book when I'm dead than when I'm alive. So when you're writing, it makes sense, even from a marketing perspective, I guess, to assume that you're dead when most people are reading these words. And that gives you an incredible freedom, right? Because it totally removes your ego from the interaction. Like, especially if you're writing something personal. And your work is very much like a memoir, right? It's like a visual memoir of these days of your life, these years of your life. And I see that your personality is oriented toward that kind of revealing. You like that. You like this stream I was watching, you talked about radical transparency and feeling like a kind of freedom in having no secrets. Even now, when I asked you earlier before we started, I said, if there's anything you say, we can edit it out that you're not comfortable with. And you said, I'm an open book. That's obviously important to you. Where does that come from?
Yeah, it's something that I'm getting better at and practicing, but this idea of literally not caring about what other people think. So, I'll have different epiphanies when I try to break through these layers of, do I have any secrets? What are they? Can I write them down? Why are they secrets? What if all of them just got announced like tomorrow for the whole world? All that really matters is just like how I feel about it. Like, other people's opinions don't matter. All that matters is like the self. So it just comes from that place of, all that really matters is how I see myself and how I react to things. So, yeah.
Do you have a spiritual practice? Do you meditate, or like, how have you arrived at this sort of precocious wisdom? Science,
Capitalism, humanism, which I'm starting to learn a lot more about why he's dead. No, I'm not religious. I'm more agnostic. Spiritual is tricky because a lot of people get really mixed up in the semantics. You could argue that most things are religion because everything is made up by man. Like, nothing is natural, and then even natural. I don't know. I guess that's the biggest mantra I know. I don't know what I'm talking about, so I'm just happy to learn and figure it out. And yeah, that's really what I'm up to these days. Walking, reading, learning, petting dogs, drinking coffee, sometimes exploring. Yeah. Connecting with people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's definitely where I was. I remember reading, there's an essay by Robert Frost that I read. I think I was in Alaska, or maybe just before I went to Alaska. And he says, well, there are 2 images in that essay I remember. One of them is he describes his education as being like walking through a field and like brambles stuck to his pants. And those were ideas. And he just sort of went through life, and some things stuck to him and others didn't. And that was the sort of accumulation of knowledge and experience and thoughts and that became him, right? And the other, so that was sort of a accumulation model of becoming who he became. And the other was the opposite. It was, he said, like a piece of ice on a hot stove, we each must ride our own melting. I thought, I think he actually said a poem must ride its own melting, but I took it to mean as a life. And I felt like, yeah, I want to ride my own melting. I want to sort of, the melting of ego, the melting of expectation, the melting of disappointment and preconceptions of what my life is going to be. I just want to like melt that stuff down and let it lubricate my journey.
Jeez. Yeah, every time I've come across his poems, I've always connected. So I should do some more research into his foundation stuff. And I think you mentioned Thoreau as well. Obviously they're on point for a minimalist hiker, nature boy. So
yeah,
how do you describe? How would you reflect that question back to yourself? Like, would you describe yourself as spiritual or?
Yeah, I feel like I have I've had it. I mean, again, like you, the word spiritual is tricky because people mean different things by it. Mm-hmm. I guess what I mean by it is that I have a strong sense based upon experience that the material realm in which all this is happening is a very partial view that we have of whatever we're going to call reality, that there are planes above and below, and by that I don't mean better and worse or good and evil or anything, but like that it's like our perception of reality is like our perception of light or sound. There's a range that we can perceive, but there's all sorts of stuff happening at higher and lower frequencies that we aren't capable of perceiving. And sometimes I have had experiences that seem very clearly a sort of flash of perception of something outside of that normal realm, outside of that normal spectrum,
Like, what's that? Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's perspective
like,
changing. It makes you realize that you're probably much smaller and more insignificant, or, there's just more out there, right? Is that kind of an outcome of that line of thinking, or?
Yeah, that things are, by definition, more nuanced than the human brain. There's no way that the brain can be capable of perceiving everything, right? We know that the brain exists within a much larger context. So, I guess I'm spiritual in the sense that I think there's a lot more going on than we normally perceive. And that gives me comfort. But I don't think the comfort is the reason I believe it. Because there were years when I didn't believe it. And then things would happen and be like, holy shit, what is that? Now, how do I integrate that into my understanding of reality?
Throughout life, do you think you've gained slowly more and more, like building a house of your understanding of who you are and your place in the world, and just like the foundational, just what is life and all of this? Or have there been like tectonic shifts or sudden changes where it's just like, oh, that whole house is gone, I got to rebuild a new house? Like, do you feel like you've been on a single path towards understanding, or is it more malleable?
Yeah. It's both, of course. I mean, like you said, your mantra is, I don't know anything. And I think any intelligent person really ultimately is going to arrive at that mantra. And another mantra is, everything is what it is and the opposite. I was talking with a friend this morning about how, and we were talking about relationships and how I think a lot of relationships falter because we're afraid of acknowledging the sort of certain aspects of the other person that we know are there. And I'm thinking specifically of sexual stuff. Like we're afraid to acknowledge that the other person is going to be attracted to other people. So let's say it's a heterosexual couple. The dude is freaked out that the woman finds other men attractive, has sexual fantasies about other men, whatever. So he's freaked out about that.
That comes from him, though, right? It's on his insecurity.
Right. And then vice versa, right? Like the woman doesn't want him to look at other women. She doesn't want him to look at porn, whatever. Like,
but most people blame the other person. Yeah.
When it really comes from themselves, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And the reason that we're freaked out about it is because we know that we have it inside ourselves. So we set up this relationship model where it's like, I'll pretend not to be who I am if you agree not to pretend not to be who you are. And then we'll both pretend that we don't recognize this happening with each other. And then we'll like live half our lives together, even though we're really together all the time, constantly terrified of what we know is there. It's just a fucking mess.
Yeah. It's like a castle built on sand or limestone.
Right, exactly. And so how do you overcome this? How do you, resolve this issue? And the only way to resolve it, I think, is to surrender to it. And as you surrender to it and say, look, I know you have these appetites. I know you have these thoughts. Of course you do. You're a human being. This is what my first book was about, by the way. And as soon as you do that, suddenly, instead of that thing having power over you, you absorb its power and you are empowered by it. Mm-hmm. And, I think women are very attracted to men who aren't fucking afraid, right? So suddenly, by overcoming this fear, by surrendering to it, you become a more powerful person. So surrender results in power, right? Seeking power often results in weakness because now you're like the kind of person who's running around trying to be powerful all the time. That's a weak person. So everything, this is a very convoluted way of answering your question, but I feel like, as I've gotten older, I've become more capable of realizing the incredible wisdom of that yin-yang symbol, right? That all darkness contains a spot of light, all light contains a spot of darkness, and they're swirling around each other constantly. And that's the nature of reality. But anyway, back to camera equipment.
Dichotomy, yeah, back to camera equipment. It's the yin-yang of my Sony A7. No.
But you asked earlier about producing or traveling. And what I felt, so the first few years of traveling, it was all just experience. It was all just, I want to learn, I want to meet people, I want to read books, I want to lie in hammocks, I want to swim in amazing water, I want to eat mangoes. It was all just me. And then, I felt like, okay, I'm building something. I don't know what it is. I don't know what I'm going to do with my life, but I will be better at it for having had these experiences. So that was how I sort of justified it to myself. And then I had this job in New York, in the Diamond District, actually. Crazy, weird time in my life. Mid-20s, this millionaire hired me to be his personal assistant and then tried to seduce me to stay in New York, even though I wanted to go backpack around the world. And he was like, no, I'll give you $1 million. It's this whole, I've told this story on the podcast before.
Sounds like a movie.
Yeah, it was pretty intense. Anyway, I finally quit that job. And when I quit, he went and bought me the best camera that there was at that time, a 35 millimeter. Anyway, it was the Nikon F3 high eye point. You won't know what that is, but that was the camera that back in that time in the mid to late 80s, that was what all the greatest National Geographic photographers were using, and Geo and, these magazines that existed at the time. So he bought me this camera and I didn't even really know how to use it. and there's a 35 to 135 lens, zoom lens, and I took that with me to Asia and learned how to use the camera. And then I sold some photos to Rand McNally and some magazines and some, made some money to keep traveling. And I got into photography. But what ended up happening was that I felt that the photography was interfering with my ability to travel. So there was a conflict between producing content and the immediacy of my experience. So I'd see something beautiful and think, okay, I need to be here. Let's see, the moon will rise there in about 10 days. And there needs to be cloud cover. I need like a little kid in the foreground here kicking a soccer ball. And, it's like, well, I can't travel like that. Like, you have to really be committed to get the perfect shot. And I wasn't committed.
Yeah, I think that's a skill that you can hone, being able to do both in a nice balance. It's impossible to entirely enjoy, have that solo, no camera experience while capturing content, but you can find the correct balance. And I think I've found that. But on the other end, it would be very hard. It would be almost impossible and pointless for me to travel without documenting in some sense. I think I'm the opposite of how you started at this point. Yeah.
And you've always been that way. This isn't something that's happened over the years.
Yeah, I would always take photos, but I've been full-time YouTube for probably 7 years now with different channels, but documenting since high school has always been a part of my life. And it just goes back to that core thesis of just kind of fracking your own life experiences to productize yourself, to monetize your own hobbies. So all you have to do is just live and be yourself and be authentic. And that can fund more, that can fund and enable more experience.
And that's what I find so interesting. One of the things I find so interesting about you is that you don't perceive any conflict between monetizing your own experience and the authenticity of that experience.
Yeah, there's good and bad ways to do it, though. If you're renting out your time and effort to other people and selling things that you don't really care about and putting on a fake show to sell products and services, even just there's a whole aspect of just capturing and documenting for other people's sake versus what you want to do. The number one, I am making more than enough money right now. I have a lot of freedom. I practically am retired at this point, but I am aggressively just hunting down and destroying any last obligations I have throughout my entire life. Freedom is the only thing I care about at this point, and it's good and bad. I've done some video essays kind of talking about minimalism, how it helped me get to this point, but then more so than the shiny veneer of what you see with everyone talking about minimalism and just getting rid of things. 3 years later, there are some bad things about minimalism as far as cutting out too many people out of your life and relationships and looking at everything in a scale of along a spectrum. How much is this person bringing me, or how much is this person enabling me to be who I am? And yeah, you just analyze and test a little bit too much. So I've pulled back a little bit.
The minimalist, the two dudes who sort of wrote the book.
Right. Yeah.
They're friends of mine. If you want to meet them anytime, I'd be happy to introduce you.
I watched your podcast with them. Yeah.
Oh, did you?
I'm good friends with Matt. I've chatted with the whole crew. I think it would be good to chat with them on their podcast at some point. But yeah, that was a good interview. I enjoyed it. Yeah.
Yeah, they're interesting guys. You talk about minimalism and then you went right into relationships, which is interesting because I don't think they really go there. They're more about material stuff. How big is your house? How much crap do you have piled up in the attic?
Yeah, that's pop minimalism. That's like the Justin Bieber. Minimalism is old, but as far as being on YouTube, there's a couple different waves of minimalism going around, I guess. I don't know if you watched their second feminism. Netflix. Yeah. The new kids coming in to shake things up.
No, I watched. You're talking about. Wait, maybe we're talking about different minimalists here. Maybe there are too many minimalists in the world.
I know the two. Yeah. Ryan
and Josh. Yeah. Okay. You said Matt. I wasn't sure who Matt was.
So Matt shot their first Netflix and the second. He's like a filmmaker, but he's got millions of subscribers on YouTube talking about minimalism. So he's become almost bigger than them.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Metrics wise, sure.
Interesting. Right. So how would you feel about being in a relationship with a woman who was monetizing her privacy as a cam girl?
I would be okay with that. Yeah, it would take some practice, If you have never done that and then it's all happening at once, that's going to be difficult. But over time, I would get to a point because they would align with my values of, people can do whatever they want, and however it makes me feel is under my control. And if it affects me in a negative way, that's great ammunition. That's great intel for, what really bothers me. And I should dig into that and work on myself, and it has nothing to do with them.
Right. Yeah. What were you like in high school? You said you grew up in New York. Where were you?
Yeah, I grew up in upstate New York in Rochester, Finger Lakes. Went to school in Buffalo, New York for television film arts. Did my 4 years. Got an internship at MTV here in New York City, Times Square. Hated that. It was very corporate office, stifling. I was just a small fish, very small fish in a large dying pond. Started shooting weddings and started doing freelance work, working with NYU Tisch people, and just fell into freelance. Became friends with startup culture here in New York City. And then just started on YouTube and documenting my life and vlogs and travel and
Interesting. Yeah, I spent a lot of time in the Finger Lakes. I went to college at Hobart in Geneva.
Wow.
And
I played soccer in Geneva.
Oh yeah.
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 Small world.
It's beautiful, beautiful part of the world.
Growing up, you just don't have any perspective, but every fall I go back to the upstate, like Adirondack, Catskills region. No matter where I am in the world, I'll probably come home just for every fall foliage because it's amazing.
Yeah, yeah. So the first video I saw of yours, and I don't even know why, I guess the YouTube algorithm.
Yeah, it knows you better than you know yourself.
Well, I want to talk to you about that. In your stream there, you got into some pretty Black Mirror stuff where you're talking about Google knowing who we should marry better than we do, and making our decisions about what media we should be watching. It becomes, your vision of this techno future becomes pretty dystopian from my perspective. And maybe this is a difference of perspective because you seem to be pretty upbeat about it. Google's going to tell me what I should watch and what I should read, and Google has my best interests at heart. And they're like, yeah, do they, dude?
Yeah, it's Huxley, Brave New World.
Yeah. Where do you think we're going with that? You seem to be comfortable in this world in a way that I'm not. Do you feel, is it a resignation that things are the way they are? Or are you optimistic about where things are going?
Yeah, I'll read the articles and read the books and have the aha moments and get really worried and we got to do something to change it. Haven't you heard about this? Google this, tech companies. And I think those emotional responses aren't helpful. I'm just trying to learn as much as I can from all the different perspectives, but I am leaning towards one general idea that, recommendations are going to be created much better by algorithms. And as soon as Google, Amazon, Facebook, all of them can make those recommendations, it's game over pretty much. They can control in small ways how we vote, where we live, who we love, who we talk to, what we buy. It all starts with how we buy. Like, I honestly think that marketing is the bootstrap for AI, and it's really the downfall of like free will in the traditional sense of how we know it. Like, I am already under the idea that we don't have free will, and it's slowly people are starting to realize it. But yeah, just algorithms controlling what we buy and what we consume as far as media and products, that's the start of it, and it's already happened. And as far as am I worried about it, resignation, I guess, is a good idea, but I don't feel like I can control it that much. So all I can do is just learn more and understand it. And I think through that understanding, it's just, okay, yeah, this is it. And if that's dystopian, I don't know.
Do you think we had free will and we're in the process of losing it, or are we just, we have a new boss, out with the old boss, religion and, nationalism, and in with the new boss, Silicon Valley?
I think it's been pretty well understood for hundreds of years now that there is no free will. Like, I'm a firm believer in determinism and randomness rules the world. And it just makes life easier. Like, civilized world and society just runs so much smoother, more smoothly when people have this idea that they are making conscious choices. And tech companies are just starting to make it very apparent that, like, voting, what we choose, just every choice we make is slowly being steered and geared and pushed towards one direction. And it's a small number of people, rich people in power, that are kind of, making this happen. I need to read your book. The more I read summaries and look at it, I am interested. So I'll probably pick it up this week, because that's all I do. I walk around and read, so I will devour it. How many hours? Is there an audiobook, or is it just paper?
You're talking about Civilized to Death?
Yeah.
Yeah, I read the audiobook for that.
Awesome. I'm going to pick it up.
The first book, Sex at Dawn, they had actors read it. There is an audiobook, but I didn't read it. Yeah, it's funny. And I'll be watching some future video and wondering if you're listening to me as you're walking along there. It's weird kind of surreal intimacy.
Yeah.
So in the context of this, I don't know if we want to call it resignation or just acknowledgement of the way things are, your work does seem to be in some ways in a confrontation with that.
Oh, yeah.
It's definitely a celebration of a natural world, which we're always, watching be devoured. It's a celebration of solitude in many ways, which is one of the most rare commodities in the world, and becoming more rare as population explodes and remote areas get increasingly overrun. And also minimalism is a conflict with consumerism, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So do you see these things as forms of resistance, or is this just who you are and you just do it because you do it?
Yeah, it's definitely counterculture, and it's every identity I choose or process, minimalism, they're all tools just to help me solve problems. And the problems of the modern world are ones of abundance. It's too many choices. It's too many things to buy. We just get drowned in information, just too much news, too much fatty, easily high-calorie food. So minimalism helps solve a lot of those problems. The fewer desires you have, the less you'll be disappointed when they don't happen. And there's like a minimalism of relationships. There's a minimalism of desire. There's a minimalism of just like, I have no emails, no schedule. If I work on a project, I will work on it till it's done and then have nothing. So minimalism has taken root in every aspect. And that's why it's weird doing, like, I've reflected, you're correct in assuming that there is a lot of conflict in what I do for work. Like Amazon and Google are my income. Like I get checks from, like, thanks Bezos, thanks Larry. And yeah. And in a sense, I'm definitely really conflicted. Yeah.
It's your videos are interesting because they're so immediate in the sense that, you know, I watched the first video of yours I watched, you were on that island off the coast of Greenland, I think. And I was struck, the image, you know, I was looking at YouTube and there's this image of this incredible angular green island with big cliffs. And the headline was like, you know, hiking alone for, I don't know, 17 miles or something on this island.
60,
sorry.
Hey, give me credit where it's due.
The big 6-0. And I clicked on it and it starts, you're standing there in a bathroom, like at a, whatever, where you start. And you're just looking at yourself in the mirror.
Airport, yeah.
Airport. Yep. And then you're like tying your shoes and you're like walking and there's some people in the background and you don't say anything. And I was just totally drawn into it. Almost like it was like a live webcam that you had like stuck to your forehead. It was like I was in your experience. And I feel like that might be the appeal of this, because it's not like, hi, I'm Kraig Adams, and today we're going to take you in a blah, 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 and, you know, here's my partner, and, you know, and this is the blah, blah. And sometimes at the end of the video, you'll sit down and say, okay, so here's how this worked out. Here's why I like this trail. I flew into here. I drove here, da, da, da. And you sort of like give them, you know, how you can do this. But I feel like so many people are watching your videos instead of doing it, right? Either because they can't, or they just don't have the energy or whatever.
Yeah. So how would I define the success of the videos? Yeah.
Right.
I make conscious choices to have wide angles for POV to make it immersive. I subvert expectations as far as people thinking it's going to be, hey, what's up, YouTube? This is the hike, handheld, shaky. I'm definitely a filmmaker who started hiking, and I would say the vast majority of hiking footage and videos on YouTube, at least, will be hikers who get a camera and start shooting stuff. So I'm going in the opposite direction with that.
Right.
And I just have... I've been doing this for a while, you know, YouTube for a while. So I'm able to go to places, have a diverse menu of locations, and just dedicate an entire month to one single trip, one video. So, yeah.
It's awesome. Do you remember the first time it occurred to you to do this?
Hiking, or the silent aspect, or filmmaking, or what
the whole thing, the like, I'm going to make a movie of myself hiking, and you're just going to hear ambient sounds. I'm not going to say anything, no dialogue.
Yeah. I started out, like, I sold a channel called Wedding Film School, so I was like in a completely different genre. I hated that. I just wanted to do like travel vlogging. I started doing that in the city. I was like, okay, this is like crazy, kind of show-offy, like forced happiness. So I started traveling more just to kind of open myself up, like this New York City of Thailand, the New York City of blah, blah, blah. And it was just still too forced happiness. Like, it's a strange thing making YouTube videos in different cities when you're there for the first time. So who am I to recommend anything in Bangkok? I'm an idiot,
right.
You know? I'm a dumb American young idiot. So I felt a fakeness with that. And there could have been some aspect of making videos that kind of leaned into that. Like, I'm an idiot. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to go through the hardship of looking like a fool, learning about these new things and trying this food and going to this neighborhood for your sake, so that when you come to Bangkok, you can have a leg up. And that was just way too crazy. And I'm going into the mountains, the nature where it's quieter, where there's fewer people. And I felt amazing. This was some of the first time that I was like truly alone. You know, I would travel by myself, but always link up with people and other YouTubers to collaborate because I felt it was expected of me. And I always thought it would be better content. But once I embraced being alone, because yeah, that's also a skill that you have to improve at. It's pretty easy to go on an overnight hike, but sitting there by yourself with no one to talk to, nothing to do, not many people do that these days, let alone for 5 days at a time. So the Iceland video you were talking about, yeah, I didn't see someone for probably 3 days. And that was one of the first times that had ever happened. And I just felt that ambient music that comes in slowly, fades out, and then pretty much no talking, you know, just minimalism, showing and not telling would fit that landscape and just the experience of being there by myself. And I loved that. Yeah. The alone aspect was definitely something I leaned into with future videos.
You know, I think that might be why I connected so much and why I got into that circuit of what we started talking about, you know, the way your future self is going to look at these. Because one of the, you know, most of the people who listen to this podcast are closer to your age than to mine. And a lot of what we talk about is, you know, I have this whole series where I talk about my travel experiences back in India in, you know, 1987 or Nepal or Thailand, you know, back in the day. And one of the big differences between traveling then and traveling now is, you know, there was no internet, there were no smartphones. I remember going to Kashmir. The first time I went to India, I went up to a place called Srinagar, and I had bought this little shortwave radio when I left New York. I bought this radio, and I was up in Srinagar, and I would, at night, I'd like, you know, pull the antenna up and tune this little radio, and until I heard an English speaking voice. Mm-hmm. And it was like, you know, this is the BBC World Shortwave or blah, blah, blah. And they were talking about cricket scores or something. And I listened to that for this connection to my world, because my world was so far away. I was so isolated, you know. And now I was in Thailand a year ago, and you know, you go to a cafe and everyone's sitting there looking at their phones, talking to their fucking mother or texting their girlfriend back home. And it's like, you haven't gone anywhere, bitch. You are nowhere, you know, you're not traveling. And I'm totally aware of the fact that someone from 30 years earlier would look at me and say, oh, what, you got on a jet and 12 hours later you were in India? That's not travel. You got to take a ship, you know, a steamship. So I recognize that there's a continuity in this, but I do think there's something that people are really missing, and it's what you described. It's the solitude. It's the being really, really far away from everyone you know. That's such a valuable experience.
Yeah,
so
especially
clarifying.
Coming from New York, yeah. But it also goes back to them and their own, like, the more that you compare it to your own experience, obviously it might like frustrate you and stuff. Yeah, because people can like download Netflix shows and watch that in their hostel. Like I've seen people hiking, watching shows on their phone while they're hiking. Like we can shake our head and like be like, you're not doing it right. But yeah, people even like just the whole idea of caring about feedback content in general is a really slippery slope that I'm working on. But yeah, a lot of people will just be like, even just having the camera is ruining your hike. What are you doing? And none of that matters. Like all that matters is just your own experience. So it's so silly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're kind of like a turbocharged version of the person who walks down the trail videotaping themselves as they walk down the trail, right? I mean, who knows who they're doing that for? I never, you see people at concerts and they all have their phones. They're all like, well, who's ever going to watch that? Like, I don't know who watches all this content that's being created all the time.
Yeah, any judgment you throw at that person, that always comes back to yourself. Why does that upset you? Why do you feel the need to like judge that person? It has everything to do with like your own insecurities. Like maybe you're jealous that you're not doing it like that. Like maybe if you tried it, you would feel like embarrassed. So you're jealous they're getting away with it. Like, yeah, just the more that you can like really get to the root of it, that's what's helpful.
Yeah. So how do you
I get
deal?
the looks, I get the stares,
Right.
Just looking the way I am and having a big camera in some of these places, that's enough. But, setting up a tripod on a trail is even weirder, like for hikers. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah, I was thinking about that on the Kilimanjaro video because that's one of the only ones I've seen so far where you're in a group of people and you must have had to explain over and over again what you were doing and who you are. And I mean, there's a social aspect to that, which wasn't happening. And also you looked exhausted from the beginning. At the very beginning of that, I thought, man, like, did he just break up with his girlfriend or like the guy doesn't look happy. He's having trouble in Africa.
Yeah. So for context, people, that was not a trip that I planned. I planned on doing Kilimanjaro when I was much more experienced. And a person reached out to me. He's like, I will fund the whole trip. I'm going. Like, just join us. I'll take care of you. I'm like, I don't know. He's like, you can do it. I'm like, okay, fine. Showed up in Africa. I was sick. I had like a slight flu, cough, just whatever.
From the beginning?
From the beginning, yeah. And then
okay.
I made choices for the editing and the production of the video that kind of reflect how I was feeling. Like you said, I never hike with people. I'm always alone. And I gain energy. I gain calmness from that. And it was very sapping and very stressful for me to be with so many people. In our group, with the porters, the chefs, the hikers, we were a group of 110-ish. And then there were other groups from all around the world alongside us. So on the mountain, we probably had like a small camp of 600 people, which is insane to me because we had to bring up everything. It's like a Burning Man that goes up and down the mountain. It was insane. So I didn't put music. I was just a fly on the wall with the whole video. Like I really included other people's laughter, their jokes, their faces, because I didn't feel like a part of that. Like I literally, in the video and then also on the trip, I felt like I was just like, does anyone else see this? Like, this is crazy.
There's this beautiful moment where you've got the camera on a table. It's like a mealtime or something, and the camera's focused on you, and there's some woman like talking about her dogs. And he's like, I've got a dog blanket, I've got the dog pillow. And you just sort of go, you're definitely a dog, Mom. And there was this like, what the fuck am I doing here? It was really good.
And then she like kind of ignored me and then went back to her story. I'm just like, cool.
Yeah, I think I'm going to get sick tonight.
Yeah. So I get people asking to hike with me all the time. I'm like, no. I'll hike with my brother, my girlfriend. And then, I could make money doing tours and meetups and workshops, but it's just not fun. I don't want to do it. No. Too much responsibility. It's not me.
Yeah, you've got it worked out pretty well. What's it like? Like, I traveled through my 20s and 30s, right? And in my late 30s, I'd finished my doctoral dissertation, and the dissertation was about human sexuality in prehistory. And my professors were like, you should write a book. This could be a good book. And I was like, yeah, okay, write a book. Like, that's like telling me I should build a rocket and go into outer space or something. Like, come on. Anyway, a few years later, I met a woman who's a psychiatrist. She had a steady income, and was really smart and was like, hey, I think you should write a book. I'll pay the bills. You write the book. And that really motivated me because, you know, she was getting up every morning and going to work, running a psychiatric clinic, really working her ass off. And then she would come home and read what I'd written that day. And, you know, we'd discuss it. And it's like, well, the least I can do is fucking write. She's doing all this. So it really, it enabled me. It both freed me up and motivated me. I wrote the book. The book became a bestseller. Next thing you know, I'm giving TED Talks. I'm on TV. I'm on all these documentaries. I'm on Joe Rogan's podcast. I'm on everybody else's podcast. I start this podcast. So at the age of, you know, roughly 40, I became a semi-public figure where I'm getting lots of emails from strangers. I'm getting people offering me money to do things I don't really want to do. This all happened to you when? In your mid-20s? Something like that?
Yeah. Within the last 2 or 3 years, it's kind of become exponential. It's kind of crazy.
It was crazy for me in my 40s. So I'm trying to imagine what it's like for you when you're still trying to work out who you are and suddenly all this stuff's coming at you.
Yeah. That's why I'm just trying to read as much as I can and learn things from smarter people because if, you know, you look at yourself a year ago and I was an idiot. So I think as long as I'm heading in the right direction, I feel good about that. I just have so much free time. Like I've gotten rid of, like I said, I've got a lot of freedom and I'm trying to get I'm fracking myself for freedom at this point. And yeah, I just want a dog. I want to keep growing my long-term relationship with my girlfriend. Probably going to move in this week or this month. Walking, reading, probably shoot a YouTube video every month. But I'm making more than enough. I'm saving and, you know, I've got no one to tell me what to do. So I'm getting better at learning what the correct amount of sponsorship, what a long-term relationship with anyone that I do rent out my audience for looks like. And yeah, feel pretty good. Just want to keep learning and just relax and chill.
How do your parents feel about your career path?
Yeah, so I was definitely the black sheep in the family. Everyone else was go to school, get married, have kids, medical, tech, lab stuff. My dad was an electrical contractor, an entrepreneur, so he definitely taught me a lot of stuff about that. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. Yeah, they encouraged me. They motivated me to go to college. And when I was in college and didn't see the need for college anymore, they definitely kept me in and kept me, wanted me to graduate. So, yeah, in hindsight, I probably didn't need to go to college at all, but, you know, hindsight's 2020. I definitely have... I've even had this conversation with my girlfriend a bit because she's in a similar boat. She's Israeli living in the U.S. So different cultures have different amounts of dependency on traditional family values. And I'm just very individualistic. I see the value in family, but I'm more so of the camp of choose my friends and family than the people I grew up with. And I'm starting to realize that there's a lot of good, there's a lot of value in being a weed that blows in the wind versus a tree. And this also comes back to having too much control and freedom in my life to cut out anyone I don't think is gelling. When there's good, when you have to kind of force yourself to put up with people who have different ideas, family.
Yeah, you mentioned that earlier when you were talking about the minimalism of relationships, and I was thinking about how a lot of people I know who are around your age, and myself when I was around that age, I think there's a shedding of the skin experience where you grew up in a certain world, you've got your friends from home, you've got your friends from college, you might have a girlfriend that sort of from your early 20s or late teens, and a lot of stuff from that period of your life lingers into your 20s. And then around your late 20s, early 30s, there's a moment where even if you're not conscious of it, you're saying, okay, is the rest of my life going to be a continuation of this? Or am I going to leave this and have a different kind of life? And it can be as concrete as, am I going to leave the town I grew up in, or am I going back home? Or am I going to leave the girlfriend that I've had since high school, or am I going to marry her? They're like stay or go decisions that have to get made at that age. And it's fucking excruciating. It's really hard. And I think a lot of older people forget how hard it is to be young. And I don't forget at all. I don't know if that's because of the journals I kept or what. But I remember how fucking hard it was. And the hardest thing was realizing that I needed to say goodbye to people that I loved. And it took me so long to deal with that conundrum of like, these are good people. These are not people I want to reject. They're not people I want to hurt, but I need to move on. I need to go into another world here, and I can't take them with me. They don't understand where I'm going. Yeah, that's been a big weight. And so when I talk to someone like you and you're talking about the minimalism of relationships, it's like, fuck, man, that's hard. That's really hard to be. And you've got the added weight of financial success and, whatever public profile you've got people talking to you. You don't know who the fuck they are.
Yeah, I would describe it as just constantly raising the standards of what I expect and how I would define different like a friendship, a close friend, close-knit circle, or someone that I unconditionally love. And then also a minimalist is a scientist. We test and analyze and then iterate. We just constantly are testing, instead of just letting things be the way they are and not questioning things. That's pretty much how I define a minimalist.
Yeah. I remember being very comforted by a thing I read in a book called A Journey to Ixtlan by Carlos Castaneda. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He was an interesting counterculture figure in the late 70s. He was an anthropologist who wrote a series of books sort of about shamanism, and he claimed that he knew this shaman from northern Mexico who sort of changed reality and could like appear and disappear and do all these magical things. And it became very controversial whether this shaman even existed or whether this guy had made it all up or whatever. But he's talking to the shaman at one point, and he's sort of, the younger man asking the older man for life advice. And he's like, I don't know what path I should choose. And the older guy says, it really doesn't matter which path you choose because they all lead to the same place, which is nowhere, right? Death, everything, all paths lead to death. And he says, the point is to choose a path with heart. That's all you can do. If you're on a path with heart, the path will always be easy for you. You'll enjoy the journey. If you stray from the path with heart, your life becomes torture. And that's how you know. You're either enjoying it or you're not. And I thought, man, that makes perfect sense. Like for me, that became a guiding principle. So it sort of seems selfish in a way because it's all about, am I enjoying this or not? But it's more than selfish. Is this aligned with my essence? So when you were talking about, being a scientist and testing and judging and eliminating what doesn't work. It sounds very clinical and maybe cruel in some ways, but I think it's ultimately really life affirming, because you only have a certain amount of time, and you can only have a certain number of people in your life that you can really pay attention to.
Yeah. Yep. And then just placing that time and my resources where it is most efficient. Yeah. Yep.
Not just efficient, but enjoyable, right? Like there's no
I want the
shame
maximum
in pleasure.
amount of enjoying. Yeah. Maximal. I want to maximize efficiency. It sounds clinical, but yeah, that's true. Like I don't want to waste my time. Like even when hiking, like every aspect of my life, I try to think, how can I get the most out of it in the shortest amount of time, highest quality.
Yeah. Yeah.
In relationships too. Yeah.
You do commercial photography, right? Or have you given that up?
I don't even know what commercial photography means. I've
You
focused.
do jobs, right? Like you were in Vietnam or something, and you were like, I did a job for Louis Vuitton or something. I don't remember who it was.
Yeah.
Right? You like do gigs.
I've pretty much given all of that up. Yeah. It's been a sliding scale. And of course, there's a dollar amount that most people would say yes to most things for. Yeah, but my filter has been raised, and I've applied many filters to what I'll say yes to. Like the last year has been a lot of no's. I've been learning. I've fallen in love with the word no, just to keep my schedule free. And I've learned, it's an amazing thing when you can have years of experience and then step back and analyze patterns. Like I love analyzing patterns because it's not a mystery anymore. Like I see the height in the trough or whatever. And I just don't get much happiness out of making a lot of money in a short amount of time. The long-term relationships are just always more life fulfilling, and eventually they do make me more money down the road. So, flying somewhere to just make a quick buck for a company that I'll never even get feedback from, that was a one-off job, and I've never talked to anyone I worked with that project ever again. Yeah, thinking more long-term and less short-term. So
I remember you saying something in the video. You were talking about how, no criticism of the people you were working with, but the models, like none of them were happy. They were all faking happiness, and everything was fake, and the props were fake, and the settings were fake, and it was all just nonsense. And I was really happy to see you say that out loud, and also to see how you've designed your life in a way that allows you to avoid that. It's fucking awesome, dude.
That was a very strange trip. Thank you. And of course, it's all you have to compare it to something. So it was me projecting, trying to compare my authenticity and how I conduct myself compared to these other people. And that was my first, my life, the creator world, YouTube, just influencers in general, people making money through influence. It's kind of fake compared to most people's experiences and jobs and typical day to day. But this trip, I don't know if it's because the money was raised, the stakes were raised. It was a luxury brand, which is built upon, facade. This trip was insane. The amount of money wasted, the amount of pointless stuff we did, and just the amount of inefficiency was mind-boggling. So yeah, I took that bad experience and just 180'd in my own life in the opposite direction. So yeah, I'm glad that shows.
Yeah.
Oof, man.
Well, listen, I don't want to take up more of your time. I really enjoy getting to meet you a little bit here. And I just want to say that I spent a lot of time with younger people sort of picking my brains for guidance. And I remember when I was young, I had older people in my life who gave me a lot of time and a lot of attention, and I was always confused. I had imposter syndrome, and I was like, why? Why would they why would this professor want to hang out with me? Why is this, these people, what's their agenda? What's going on? And as I've gotten older, I've come to realize how nourishing it is for older people when you meet someone young who's really conscious and attentive to trying to live life as well as possible. It's inspiring. It works both ways. So thank you.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I honestly could do this for much longer. I have a lot of questions, and the more I learn about you, the more questions I have. So that's a paradox. And I think you're right. The selecting knowledge and learning from diverse people and experiences is always better, because I don't know what I don't know. And yeah, I hope we can have more conversations in the future, because I'm fascinated by your travels and what you've learned.
I'm down anytime. You can come back on this podcast, or, do you have a podcast? You seemed to, in the stream, it was like you were doing a podcast and a YouTube stream, and what's the new one? Fuck.
Twitch, Clubhouse.
Clubhouse, yeah. I signed up for Clubhouse. I've never used it. But yeah, it's like you were doing them all at once. It's high efficiency.
Social media is all kind of the same thing. All email newsletters with different flavors. So yeah, I shy away from the word podcast just because people have ideas of what it is, and I don't know. I'm just kind of doing whatever I want to do. I don't even have a name for the podcast. It's just Kraig Adams. So yeah, I could have you on there. That would be a fun conversation, but it'd probably be live. I'm surprised you don't do live streams.
You know what? I can. This thing I'm using, Riverside, it does live streams, but that would require me to figure out how to do it. See, I'm a minimalist too, but my idea of efficiency is I don't want to spend time learning to do shit that I don't need to do. I've got some millennials in my life who take care of a lot of stuff for me.
Yeah.
But in fact, there's a guy right now who's setting up a YouTube channel for me. I've done the podcast for 9 years, something. And he's just now, this guy's like, hey, why don't we set up a YouTube channel and I'll do it for you. I'm like, all right.
That's where I would consume this type of content. So I think it's smart to be just, distributing there, because it's just, it's just a click.
Well, until COVID, I didn't do remote at all. It was always, I want to be in the room with you. And I wasn't going to set up cameras and shit for that. I bought a camera that I was going to use, and then I was like, this is a pain in the ass. And, it makes people uncomfortable, cameras and lights. And I'm much more interested in people being relaxed and just forgetting that we're recording,
Yeah.
So
trying to make people comfortable, but doing it remotely online, I think, is the golden ratio of what you should be doing.
Yeah.
It's too much work to do it in person. As fun, as easy, and better it is, it's just online is the future. So.
Yeah. And I mean, it's hard though, because I spend at least half the year traveling. When I'm in the U.S., I've got a Sprinter van that I live in every summer, Scarlett Johansson. And
that's the name of the van?
Yeah. She's red, hence Scarlett. Yeah.
Nice. I met her once. I saw her dancing at a wedding.
Really?
Yeah, I was shooting that wedding. Yeah, she gave a speech.
Oh. Did you hook up with her?
No. I would not even bother her. I kept as much distance as I could away from her.
Yeah.
Scarlett Johansson van, though. Very cool.
Yeah. So yeah, the remote thing is it's both easier in the sense that it's location independent, but it's harder because I don't have Wi-Fi, when I'm out in Idaho. So I don't know, waiting for Elon Musk to get his Starlink thing all set up, and then I'll be good to go.
Slap it on the van. That'd be good. Yeah. I think it's
all
happening
right
right now. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to stop recording.